Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Chris Oatley's ArtCast. My name is Chris Oatley, and I'm an artist and a writer living in Los Angeles, California, working in the entertainment industry. And when I was about 12 years old, I was Indiana Jones for Halloween. It also snowed on that Halloween, and though my mom offered my winter coat, I insisted on wearing only a white t-shirt, since my 12-year-old's wardrobe lacked anything close to a screen-accurate leather jacket. Sure, the spray-painted plastic Dick Tracy hat and the 3-foot length of white rope served as acceptable stand-ins for the Indy hat and whip, but the teal and white nylon coat was just unacceptable. I gave up about 30 minutes into Trick or Treat and went home shivering. I was better off candyless than creatively compromised. This is the second part of a two-part tutorial. The first part, along with a higher res version of this finished piece, are available for download on my site, chrisoatley.com. That's chrisoatley.com. I'm going to start this tutorial off with a response to an email that was sent by Marty Quatani in regard to the first part of this tutorial. Marty writes, "Chris, just wanted to let you know I watched your podcast on character design, the alien janitor, and once again you opened my eyes to a totally different way of working with Photoshop. One question, why the spongy, bubbly type brush for coloring? It's the brush that you use to paint most of the alien janitor. It looked like it was made up of a series of different sized circles. The choice of types of brushes and their effect would be a cool topic for a podcast." Marty's website is martytunes.com. Well, thank you, Marty. Thank you for writing in and contributing to the show in such an effective way. If other listeners or viewers have questions for me that you'd like me to answer on the show, you can contact me at coatley@mac.com. I'd also love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the show and my website, so feel free to email me with your feedback. I love hearing from you, and your voice is necessary in making this show better and more effective, and more inspiring for everyone involved. So please, please write in. And of course, Twitter is my favorite way to interact with you. It's more immediate, and it makes it easier for you to make connections with each other. You can find me on Twitter at twitter.com/Chris Oatley, spelled out as one word. Really effective way to contribute to what's happening on this show and the website is to write us an iTunes review. If you just search for Chris Oatley's ArtCast on iTunes, go to the show's page and leave a high-star rating. And if you're feeling particularly creative, you can write a review for the show. It helps the show get found by people that are looking for podcasts about art, and it will that's one of the most effective ways to help grow the audience. You can also call in feedback or questions for the show by leaving a voicemail on the listener line. That's area code 818-588-OATS. Easy to remember. 818-588-OATS. If you call and leave a voicemail for the show, you will receive, as a thank you for taking your valuable time to invest in the show, a set of custom Photoshop brushes that were designed by yours truly. Some of you may have noticed that the store on chrisoatley.com is growing. I've recently added an Amazon.com widget to the chrisoatley.com store. If you go to the chrisoatley.com store and you click on any of the links inside of the Amazon.com widget, it will take you to Amazon.com, but up to 15% of any purchase made through those links on chrisoatley.com will go towards what's happening on the site or on the show. So that's a fantastic way for you to contribute to what's happening here. It should also be stated that I took great care to select the books that appear in that widget. I labeled the widget required reading on purpose because I think if I wanted to make sure that there wasn't a single book in there that I didn't feel was completely necessary to the effective education of an artist working in or with interest in the entertainment industries. And now, finally, I'll answer Marty's question. The brush that Marty is referring to in his email gets a lot of play in part 1 of this tutorial, and you can only see it in action for the first couple seconds of this part, and then I switch to the brush that I'm using right now, that you're watching right now. So you can, of course, find part 1 of the tutorial on my website, chrisoatley.com, and you can see the brush that Marty described as a grouping of circles. I think he referred to it as a spongy, bubbly brush. That brush is available for download on my website under the Resources heading. That link is accessible through, I believe, every page on the website. Just up at the top it says Resources. That's also how you get to the store. You can see a link up there that says Store at the top of every page. But back to the resources. The brush is called Daisuke Brush Wild 83, if I'm not mistaken. I named it after one of my favorite painters, Daisuke Tsutsumi. And I'm making a note right now to put a link to his site into the show notes accompanying this episode. There's also a link, I know for a fact, there's a link to his site on the blog, the main blog page on chrisoatley.com. Daisuke is an incredible illustrator. I've been following his work for years and years, ever since I was, I think, maybe a sophomore, maybe even a freshman in art school, in college. And he worked for a long time. He worked at Blue Sky Studios and did some beautiful paintings for movies like Robots. And now he works at Pixar. And I believe he's currently, as of the time of this recording, working as an art director on a film there. Maybe, actually, I think it might even be Toy Story 3, if I'm not mistaken. But Daisuke's amazing, and there's something I've noticed in the Art of Robots book, and I don't have it right now, but I will actually. I'll do it by the time this episode goes up. I'll put a link to purchase that book, so you'll be able to get that through my site. But anyway, there's a number of paintings by Daisuke in that book that are really great examples of, I think, my favorite kind of painting that he does. And it's this very opaque painting approach, and yet it's the brushwork is very, very messy, and yet he groups the values together in a really there's not a lot of transparency, is what I'm trying to say, in the actual brush strokes. And so I built that brush with the intent to try and kind of replicate the way that he makes brush strokes, and of course, repurpose that technique for, to become something of my own. But like everything, that any of us do, it always starts from, it's always inspired somewhere. So that's where that brush originated. But I've since kind of learned. I use that brush all the time, and I've since kind of learned some various ways to use that. And one of the ways is the way that it's used in part 1 of this tutorial. Marty, I cannot say that I am a fan of computer art that's trying to look like traditional art. So in other words, I'm not a big fan of Corel Painter. Now there are some pieces that are done in Painter that are clearly not trying to pretend to be a real oil painting or a real watercolor painting. Just look at the Art of Star Wars Episode 3. And really, this is not meant to be book plug podcast, but I have that available in the chrisoatley.com store as well. There are some amazing concept paintings that are done that are shown in that book that were all done in Corel's Painter, and they're stunning. They're beautiful, but they're not trying to be oil paint or watercolor. They're not trying to fake anyone out. They're clearly living in the digital realm, and they're beautiful in that regard. The problem with doing art in a kind of, typically digital way is that the typical way of digital painting is, or should I say maybe the most common way of digital painting is super polished and super rendered, because that's what the computer, wants to do. It wants to make everything very perfect and very pristine and very, shiny and polished. And of course, the appeal of real paint is that it's, the complete opposite of that. So instead of trying to, make a painting that's pretending to be oil, since I don't really like that, I use those kind of messy brushes to maintain a sense of texture and spontaneity in the painting, and yet I don't feel like it's trying to fool anyone. So it's clearly digital. It's clearly a digital painting. It's not trying to be anything that it's not. But at the same time, it has the texture, the tactile nature that we crave, that is originally found in oil painting or watercolors, or dry brush look, or through oil or acrylic. So I spent the first half of this painting laying down a bunch of texture with that Daisuke Wild brush. And then I spend the last half of it going over with this softer brush, adding detail, sharpening certain areas that I want to have an emphasis, that I want to emphasize. And of course, the areas that I want to emphasize usually are the areas that I'm lighting most intensely. So that's especially true in this piece, where the light is hitting the most intensely is the area that I want to emphasize: his face, the contrapposto kind of pose of his shoulders towards the top of the broom handle, where his hands are, because he's sort of holding his mop very nobly there, and I want to draw attention to that. So I do all that. I add detail, and I go and I render out only those areas, so that ultimately, when the piece is done, it still feels like a painting, emotionally, just rhythmically. It feels like a painting, even though it's clearly digital, and it's not trying to be. It's not trying to hide. It's not trying to pretend. It's very digital. It definitely lives in the digital realm. But it doesn't look sterile, plasticky. It doesn't look too polished or pristine, as computer art tends to kind of drift. Computer art tends to drift into that realm far too easily. And so that the texture and the loose underpainting kind of spares me from that, so long as I don't spend too much time on it and overwork the painting, which of course is something I've been talking about a lot on the site and in the show lately, how I've been trying for years to keep from doing that, because that's definitely my tendency as a painter, is to get very, to kind of get tunnel visioned and go and render out every single area. And even though that can be fun, and it's actually necessary when I'm doing visual development, certain kinds of visual development paintings for movies, for animated films, I really enjoy this kind of spontaneity, and I really enjoy the not having to spell everything out, not having to go in and render everything out in super high detail. Some of my favorite kinds of paintings when it comes to classical painting are the ones that don't spell everything out, and they kind of engage the viewer of the painting by allowing the viewer to sort of, by intriguing their imagination, by inviting them in and saying, what is, you fill in the detail. What is happening over there in that shadowy area? What is exactly going on with that hand that's not fully rendered out? Those just suggestions of the tools in the tool belt, the unfinished shoes and hands. I just love that, and I love that because it invites the viewer in. It invites them to participate. It's exactly like good storytelling. The best kinds of stories, in my opinion, are the ones that don't spell everything out, that leave you with some unanswered questions. I'm realizing that I should mention that the brush that I'm using to do all of this rendering is actually not available for download on the site, but you can construct it easily by just taking one of the standard, the default Photoshop brushes, just the default round brush, and set it to about 83% opacity, and I think somewhere like the 83, 88% flow, and then go into the brush editor and turn on wet edges. I believe that's all. Those are the only defining characteristics of this brush. And then what I also like to do when I'm painting in this kind of technique that you're watching here is I like to turn the sensitivity on my Cintiq, my Wacom Cintiq. I like to turn the sensitivity up about one click, one notch. That way it forces me to use a very, very light touch. And not only does that create some really nice soft blending, some really nice soft brush strokes in your painting, it also saves your wrists from that evil RSI. So please keep in mind there are new blogs or podcasts at chrisoatley.com every Monday. So until next week, go well. The music on Chris Oatley's ArtCast is provided by Storybook Steve and Kangaralian. Hear more at myspace.com/StorybookSteve.